just wanted to give a quick intro to the event, and then I'll get out of the way and let the experts handle it. So yeah, just a quick kind of on our panelists. We've got Julia from Local Globe and Hannah, who's our Chief Medical Officer and GP. I think the overwhelming sense that we feel at the Heidi team, and if the Heidi team just want to stick their hand up just so we know who's who. Yeah, right at the back there.
Heidi students.
Yep, exactly. I think the overwhelming feeling that we get is that AI's here. It's not a research project. It's not like a fun toy to play with that you just spend some money on and see where it goes. We get the sense that it's ready to rock and it's ready for prime time. So we wanted to put this event on to show how it's been used in different clinical settings from the people who've actually deployed it, what's worked, what's not, and everything in between. And yeah, really wanted to be a casual chat, very informal. If you guys want to get up, get some drink, get some food, feel free. And yeah.
Cool.
I'll hand it over to them. Thanks.
Cool. Great. So as Rags mentioned, my name's Hannah Allen. I'm a GP and Chief Medical Officer here at Heidi. Before we kind of jump in and introduce our wonderful panelists and Julia as well, I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit about my journey to Heidi to date, and sort of blending that technology with clinical practice, as some of you may be able to relate to. So I guess, like many of you in this room who are clinicians, I think we've felt this sort of really resounding sense of overwhelm with regards to the admin side of clinical practice over recent years. And you know, many years ago we were expected to see patients, we were kind of trained to do that, but now, you know, it feels like the admin side of clinical practice is growing and growing and growing and growing. And so I think that kind of disillusionment with, you know, the job, but also disillusionment with the system, with this kind of overpromise of all this really exciting stuff coming our way. And actually, there's a real kind of disparity, in my opinion, of like what is actually, you know, coming and what is actually really useful on the front line. You know, the reality that we've only just got rid of things like the fax machine and really basic stuff in recent years is true. So I think that kind of disillusionment really led me into the digital health path, and also on this kind of quest for something else, that there must be something else out there to really help on the kind of admin side of things. And in my quest, I heard about Heidi, and I'll be honest, it's probably not the best space to say this, but I was a real cynic. Didn't really believe it was going to work, and so I thought I'll give it a go with a fake patient. So I got my dad over, he's got complicated cardiac problems and respiratory problems. It was Easter holidays, my kids were running around crazy, my son wanted to play FIFA, my daughter wanted sandwiches and chocolate and what have you while I was, you know, doing my consultation. I didn't have high hopes that it was going to work. And like many of you here who've tried Heidi, my jaw genuinely hit the floor when I saw the reality of what was produced. And it was like a light bulb moment for me. I thought, this is going to change everything. And I was really, really excited about it. Picked up the phone to the guy who just spoke and asked him for a job. And the rest is history. But I really wanted to kind of share that journey because I think it's really important to have that like belief and hope that, you know, we've got this amazing technology now. It's really being embraced by everybody on the ground. And I really want everyone here to kind of feel empowered that we can change things and take, you know, the bull by the horns and really embrace technology to improve our day-to-day lives as clinicians. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into me, and I'll hand over to Julia to give her intro as well.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and hi everyone, and welcome to Phoenix Court. I'll also give a little bit of an intro to myself. So I'm an investor. I'm an investor here with Local Globe, and we're a generalist investor, so we invest in lots of different companies. I focus on healthcare and have done so for the past 7 years. I really got into healthcare investing really just from a personal perspective. My daughter has a rare genetic disease, and the journey to figuring out what was wrong with her, to finding the right clinicians, to finding the right treatment, to building a patient community. I guess I just got really inspired about what I thought could be possible or made better for patients and for clinicians with the use of technology. And so I just have been so excited about companies like Heidi, but also working with companies like Accurix, and Jacob is here as well. And we've also partnered with some other companies like Sword and Oxford Nanopore, who are doing really exciting things in basically improving the way that healthcare is delivered and the way that patients are able to access the right care. But Local Globe, and I just wanted to say a little bit about where you are, which is in Somerstown. And so this location is actually really important because it's the poorest neighborhood of Camden. And one of the things that's interesting, is that if you live in Somerstown, you live 15 years less than if you live in Belsize Park, which is just 15 minutes on the tube. And so we've been really interested in obviously health inequality. And one of the things that we've done, in addition to deploying funds into investing into companies, has been to set up a foundation. And we partner with local GP surgery, with Caversham Street Practice, to basically enable people like Jane to deliver social prescribing methods. We also partner with lots of local organizations. So you've got the Crick across the road, you've got DeepMind around the corner. We've got amazing health systems on our doorstep, with like Royal Free, Great Ormond Street, to name a few. And so we really feel like we're I think the time is now in terms of what's possible with the advent of technologies like AI. So I guess that's an introduction to us and to Local Globe. Should we get going with the panel? Come, please come. Come. Feel free to take a seat. And all of you who have come today, I think this has been amazing to see the appetite to learn about technologies like Heidi. And so maybe what we'll do is just to kick off with a round of introductions. Would love for you to tell a little bit about who you are and where you're from.
So I'm Meera. I'm a GP partner from Hampton Medical Centre, so southwest London. I also quite recently worked for Brunel Medical School in a kind of a community lead position.
Amazing, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Matea. I'm an academic portfolio GP by background. The academic part comes from doing a PhD in health informatics, so I was one of those sort of nerdy GPs that love to code. The portfolio part comes from the fact that I am a lead for primary care digital delivery at South East London ICB. My clinical work is more related to urgent care and hospital in the home with GSTT.
Hi everyone, I'm Dimitriy. I work clinically as an acute and general internal medicine registrar at West Hertfordshire Teaching Hospital NHS Trust. And I also work as a Chief Medical Information Officer and Clinical Safety Officer for the Trust. The reason I got into that job is because I think there is a real digital future for patient care that can potentially impact things for the better. And I'm a coding nerd as well. That's one of the other reasons.
And maybe we should start by just really grounding ourselves in what is going on today. I'm wondering, Meera, maybe you can kick us off and describe what is clinical practice like for you. We've obviously heard a lot about people, a lot of GPs leaving the clinical practice because of the cognitive load and just being completely, just the admin burden. But can you describe what it's like?
I think, like Hannah said, it's huge amounts of admin burden, and I've been a GP, which I didn't think for that long, but for 10 years now, and over those 10 years, it has just significantly increased. So I think and I think when it is, you have all that admin, and you also have to see so many patients, and you also want to go home. It does get to you, and I think that's the downside of it all. And anything that kind of reduces how you're feeling at work and makes you feel like a little bit lighter, a little bit less tired when you go home, it's always going to be better. So, so I was saying to Hannah, my first interest was medical education, and I did a master's in cognitive load theory. So some of you may know what it's about, some of you may not. So essentially, it's all about our working memory, and our working memory can only hold 7 elements. Some of you may be able to hold more, but most of us can only hold 7 elements. And essentially, what they're trying to change with medical education is what can we do to, allow for the students to essentially retain more and then put it into long-term memory. So that made me think, we're doing all this for our students, but actually as GPs, how much cognitive load do we have? And, lots of mums, we all talk about mental load and husbands not understanding it, but it's essentially, it's the same thing. GPs, we have looking at our letters, we have the patients, I'm a partner, I've got, staff coming in all the time. It's constant. And so when I was actually a friend who told me, have a go at Heidi. And I just thought, gosh, it's actually just making my day-to-day work so much lighter, because I'm going through my clinic and I'm not feeling exhausted by the end of it. And I think the most important thing for me is I just feel like I'm being a better doctor.
Yeah.
And I'm being nicer to my patients because I'm listening to them a bit more, I'm doing a bit more, because I'm not having that dreaded feeling that, oh God, then I've got to go and document this and safety net this, which, has come sadly with, a lot of modern clinical practice.
Yeah. Dimitriy, maybe you want to add a little bit about what it's like in acute care,
Yeah, I completely agree with what was said earlier, but the other important element is also patient flow for us in acute care, because ultimately that improves bed occupancy and hospital capacity, so we can look after people better, more quickly and in a safer way. And what we actually did to look at that at Watford General Hospital is we measured how long it takes us to document clinical entries in the same-day emergency department for patients who come to see us, with Heidi and without Heidi. And what we actually found is that Heidi significantly improved our clinical documentation speed, and it reduced it by about 85%, which is actually a tremendous figure in terms of efficiency gains. What that means is that in a clinic where you see sort of between 10 and 15 patients, you can potentially liberate an extra hour to an hour and a half of clinicians' time to either look after more patients or to actually have a break and look after themselves. So there's a huge efficiency gain and potential improvement to patient flow. Flow is very difficult to measure because it's multifactorial. There's a lot of other factors at play when we measure patient flow through the hospital. But certainly the administrative burden, documentation, plays a big role at slowing down that patient flow as well.
Just to add to that, there was an independent evaluation where we had nothing to do with it.
So we tried to basically come up with a formal statistical and quantitative way to actually measure improvement, because it's very hard to measure things like that when you have tools like Heidi. That might improve your day-to-day performance, might improve your quality of life and your sort of clinical outcomes, but it's very hard to measure it. So we actually thought about different sort of endpoints that we could formally measure and calculate to look at that improvement. So that was one of them. Yeah.
And Matea, anything from you on your day-to-day?
So my day-to-day, I suppose I'll be a little bit transparent in this room. I do probably a lot less GP practice, general GP practice work in a clinic. I used to work in James Wigg in North Central London, and I left that to have more of a strategic role, be an associate medical director for a GP federation, and then moved into my ICB role. And the reason why I don't do as much general practice work was the burnout and the workload. And I felt that my role to a portfolio career was being stagnated and stifled by the fact that I had no time. I was given the opportunity by partners who said, oh, you'd like to bring in some digital tools? Great, do it in your own time. I don't have time. My own time after work is my own time. And so, over time, I lost the will and the interest to work in general practice, which is actually really sad because I am a GP, and a lot of the work I do is with GPs. And it's not that I don't understand, it's just that my career has kind of taken a slightly different, more strategic way that gives me a bit more of that freedom to think and a bit more freedom to actually look at how to impact on a much wider scale and a much wider level across an entire area and across hopefully country and etc. And so I then realized I can't just not do any clinical work, and found my own niche in clinical work, and I do a lot of urgent care and hospital and home. So Guy's and St Thomas's actually has a very brilliant hospital and home service where GPs literally go out with a driver, with an assistant, and do absolutely everything for a patient in their home, including catheters, IVs, drips, bloods, you literally you name it, to try and keep that patient home. And to me, that was a complete sort of change because I had the element of time. I had about an hour with the patient, which is more than what I needed. And I saw clear results. I could help that patient right there and then at that moment, and then also follow them up. And that's where I've kind of found myself in clinical medicine at the moment, trying to combine that with my sort of strategic role and that.
Great, thank you. And so I guess on that note, is AI, I guess, if it is the solution, then I guess how are you finding that it's actually being used today? Hannah, maybe you want to kick this off.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think as a GP, so I practice a couple of days a week as a GP, and I use lots of different tools, including Accurix, of course, Jacob. But I use Heidi in my day-to-day. So I'm using, Heidi to support me not only with my kind of frontline clinical care and general practice, telephone consults, face-to-faces, but also, when you're thinking about home visits and things like that as well, it's super helpful having Heidi on the mobile and being able to kind of transport it out to the patient's home with me. And then, just really not having to kind of, as Meera points out, I think that cognitive burden I personally really struggle with, and was one of the reasons why, I kind of was thinking about not being able to practice as a GP any longer, and actually just having that kind of mental space allows me to kind of enjoy being a doctor again, which is kind of what it's all about. So yeah, very much a kind of mixed picture, where I use Heidi in all aspects of kind of frontline care, probably similar to you, Meera.
Yeah. And have you all done trials and looked at Heidi versus others, or how do you evaluate different types of AI software that you're considering implementing?
I feel bad to say it, am I?
Of course.
So I mean, so how this all got introduced to me was a friend told me about it, and then really at the same time, our PCN, we had a pot of money to use basically for 6 months, where we could essentially support or back one particular AI. And it had to be AI, so it could be a scanning solution, so we did a better letter. And so the two frontliners at the moment for kind of dictation or transcription services are Heidi and Tortoise.
Yeah.
And both, essentially, what could really be the difference? They're essentially recording what you say, and then you copy it right into your computer system. And to be honest, they were both also saying the same buzzwords, like we will code to EMIS, we will be integrated into EMIS immediately. Heidi was saying we're international, Tortoise was saying we're UK based. So, I was getting it both ways, and both, CMOs were very, very pleasant and lovely people to talk to. So, but I think the only reality is you've just got to try it. And I just felt that Heidi for me was just much more intelligent. I would talk to patients, and even if it was lots of things, they were saying lots of different things, it would manage to decipher it and make logic into it. And when it was brief notes, so in my duty, so when I'm urgent care doctor, I would put it on brief note setting, and it would essentially have it would transcribe very brief notes, and then that would be really good. I can move on to my next patient. If I'm doing a more detailed clinic, or I have a mental health patient or a HRT patient, I would put it on maybe Goldilocks, which is essentially, for those who don't know, it's like the medium kind of service. And if you really, I think there are times when, perhaps you're a bit worried about the patient, or you're worried about the capacity of the patient, and you want to really get kind of quite contemporaneous notes about them, so you could put on the super detailed function. And I think what, like Hannah was saying, I think one of the problems with being a GP, and when you've done it for quite many years, so I've been a GP now for 10 years, and as a partner as well, we have to kind of just take the load of others. So, it results in you seeing more patients, you having to just do more. So as a result, what you end up doing is you document less. One of my senior partners, I don't even know what she writes sometimes, but, it's just one line and then come in basically. But, as our, I don't know if anyone's here, but our defence union colleagues will always say, sadly we are only as good as the notes that we make. And I'm lucky, but I'm sure in my career something will happen and I will get a serious complaint. But at least I know that when I'm using Heidi, it is documenting everything, and then it's good in the sense that you should be reading it basically before you copy it in, and there you can add your additional points that you wanted to make. And I think what's really worrying is sometimes it will record something and I thought, gosh, I would have never documented that, but it's actually really important. And then and obviously sometimes it over details things, but that's for you to edit and put in.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've definitely used it in all aspects of my kind of consultations as an NHS GP, and my love for it has even deepened more recently. So Hannah has kindly, I should say, not deeply, designed some templates for me because I've got a new interest in functional medicine. So that involves basically working and looking at the root causes of problems, and I'm going to be, it's private work basically, but with that comes with a 1-hour consultation, and you can imagine the documentation after that. So I'm not used to that, so I'm going to use Heidi to obviously kind of absorb all that patient information, and really excitingly as well, they've, which I've just heard about today, they're going to partner with an online platform called Semble. And Semble is used by most private GPs for recording all their patient data, recording all the pathology results. So, I mean, I think, ultimately we all want a good work-life balance, and we all want an integrated career. We all want portfolio careers. I mean, that's just the general way doctors are these days. And I think, why shouldn't we? That's the really thing. Why should we not?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Matea, what about for you in terms of how are you using AI or are you using Heidi in your day-to-day?
So yes, I do actually use, there's two sides to this question, and I suppose I can talk about regulation and how we adopt across sort of a wider sphere, but I can talk about that a bit later. But personally, so yes, I use Heidi, I use Tortoise, and I use, what's the third one? Tandem, because I need to evaluate all three of them. I have to say I use Heidi the most, and that's just my personal preference because I find that the output of Heidi is more tailored to how I would write the output, and it's also a lot easier to transfer into the documentation that I use. But I think one of the key sort of use cases that I think is really interesting is using Heidi in those sort of urgent care type settings. So if anybody knows, so urgent care has multiple different types of settings. You can be doing telephone calls for an out-of-hours provider, for an ambulance service. You could be doing face-to-face. You could work in an urgent care centre, whether that's sort of separate or kind of part of an A&E. Or you could do the urgent care response, which is the home visit. But one of the key parts of this is that as a clinician, you have no information for the most part. You don't know that patient. That patient is completely new to you. If you're lucky, you might get one sentence of a triage. I tend to get chest pain. That's it. If you're lucky. If you're extra lucky, the system that you're using might actually have access to London Care Record, the Summary Care Record, or GP Connect. Now, unfortunately, London Care Record is relatively patchy in London. GP Connect has been turned off because of the GP industrial action. And Summary Care Record can give you very, bare, sketchy, granular information that you still need to kind of try and figure out. So what does that do? That means if I can actually look at the record, it means I've got a lot of clicks to go through and a lot of different pages to go through to compile information. That takes time. If I don't have any of that information, it means I need to spend extra time with the patient to really get to the root of the problem, to know their past medical history, all their medication, all their social history, all of that. That takes time that I don't have. Because in the urgent care setting, there's a continuous flow of patients. There's never a once you're done, you're done. No, it's constantly going. And so when I came across Heidi, and all the other ambient AI tools, but particularly Heidi, it completely kind of transformed in that because I have to capture a lot more information in an urgent care setting than it is in a GP setting, I don't have to worry about having to remember. It's a lot of information, a lot more detail, that I just leave it to the side, and I can really focus on building the rapport with that patient, and I can really focus on asking all the right questions, probably more than I really need to, but that's okay, because actually the 10-minute appointment in general practice has taught us to be very kind of short, to the point, succinct, and you tend to miss much. So I can ask more, I can explain more, I can talk to the patient more, I can learn about their cat and their dog and whatever they ate, because I don't have to worry about not remembering. And what I've noticed is happening in my sort of practice in this is that I'm actually seeing more patients. Now, in general practice, we don't want to see more patients, I get it. However, I don't actually feel the burden of the workload. So I will see more patients face to face, and I'll speak to them more, but I don't feel like I'm taxed more. My mind isn't being taxed, because I know that a big part of that workload that I end up going over time is taken care of. Of course, you have to go through the notes, and I'm not going to lie, there's hallucinations and all of that, and the whole point is you have to go through your note and you have to sign it off, because it's not going to be AI's fault, it's going to be your fault. So I do have to go back and make sure that everything's right, but really it's saving me enough time that I can add extra few patients, and what that does is, when you look at the system, it's creating flow, and it's actually increasing capacity, which on a system level makes the most kind of like impact. And so that's where it's really kind of proven from that perspective to really be a key kind of adjunct to your day-to-day life. And I guess I'll bring up another really interesting new use case for those GPs that go to care homes. So one of the things that I'm finding you can really use is like, so AI will kind of, well, Heidi will turn on in the background, and it'll just kind of be your kind of background tool. You can go from patient to patient to patient to patient, and in care homes you're either in an MDT and you talk about a patient, or you literally do your visits next. But it can identify when there's a difference in the patient without using patient identifiable information, because if we talk about DPIAs and all that, that's a separate story, but it doesn't require patient identifiable information to start a new consult, or at least create a set of notes. And so let's say you've got 30 or 40 that you need to go through in one sort of care home round. It is actually, so some of my colleagues that are doing this actively, actually saving them an hour time, which is a lot. Now imagine being a GP going through all of that writing. We're still probably writing in notes, because a lot of care homes are unfortunately are not digitized that well. We're still writing in notes. Then you have to transcribe. And in some cases, I know I have colleagues that I work with that write their notes in Word, to then copy and paste into EMIS, to then send that Word document to the care home, because there's no interoperability between these systems. So imagine. And it's really, like, I think that's a really kind of interesting kind of new case. I just wanted to kind of highlight that of its use, yeah.
Brilliant. Hannah, anything more on this, or should we maybe touch on a little bit about Dimitri's evaluation?
Yeah, I think it'd be good to touch on evaluation. I think everyone would find it really interesting hearing how you ran it, what was really important to you, and also thinking, you know, we've done quite a bit around kind of the doctor perspective and how we're impacting on kind of time saving and cognitive burden. But I'm also interested in your thoughts on like the patient experience as well.
Yeah, that sounds good. So what we basically did is we did a retrospective study looking at 100 case notes, so examining 100 case notes documented by Heidi, and assessing how long it would take, or timing it as it was happening, clinicians were timing it, and assessing how long it would take to type up an equivalent quality note. So what we found out is that it takes on average around 45 to 60 seconds to actually proofread Heidi-generated note and then make changes to that note and submit it. This is in the SDEC setting, so this is quite a short time frame, because usually patient cases are more straightforward. It doesn't take as long to see the patient in SDEC. It's a little bit like a GP clinic, where you sort of spend 10 or 15 minutes per patient.
Everyone knows what SDEC is.
It's a same-day emergency care clinic, yeah. So it's basically a clinic where we see patients that are well enough not to need hospital admission, but still need medical input, blood tests, tests like x-rays, electrocardiograms, and specialist review by the medical doctor. So yeah, on average, Heidi was taking about 45 to 60 seconds per SDEC note, and the same note, so note of equivalent length and quality level of detail, would take around 6 minutes to document manually. So we're talking about good quality clinical notes, not sort of snappy one-shot documentation that some of the more experienced colleagues might do because they feel that the administrative side of things is less important. But I completely agree in that from the sort of medical legal perspective and also even from the patient's perspective as well, having thorough clinical documentation is paramount to the safety of their care. So we have to look at their vital signs, observations, mention all the blood tests to make sure we've acknowledged them, clearly document the state of diagnosis so that we can communicate accurately with their GP practice and so on. Obviously medications are very important, so we looked at a structured note. So as I mentioned before, this results in about an 85% sort of time saving for clinical documentation. So that's purely looking at efficiency gains. The other side of things that we looked at, so we tried to do like a multifaceted analysis to look at efficiency, to look at clinicians' perspective, and also to look at the patient's perspective. Is we actually had an anonymous questionnaire distributed to patients who consented to Heidi use in same-day emergency care that had 5 simple questions. And the questions all revolved around the quality of their clinical interaction. So there were things like, do you feel that the doctor was more attentive to you during the consultation as a result of the ambient software used, ambient listening technology? Are you feeling more satisfied with this consultation than previous? Of course, there are confounders. They might have seen a better clinician or someone who's a better communicator, but we've got quite a few patients in this data sample to give us some inferences. And what patients said is actually they feel that clinicians are more attentive, they listen more carefully, they have better active listening skills, they're even more empathetic in certain cases, and they feel more satisfied with the consultation, which is actually groundbreaking because that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. We want people to be satisfied with the quality of their clinical interaction and care, and that's regardless of whether you're on the ward or same-day emergency clinic setting. So the other parameter that we looked at is clinician side of things. So we distributed a simple questionnaire to resident doctors, consultant doctors, so all grades of clinicians from just sort of from graduation all the way up to senior consultants to see how much time they're spending on additional documentation outside of their clinic hours, outside of their working hours. And what we found is the average response was actually an hour to an hour and a half per week, which is a significant time sort of workload burden. So obviously Heidi helps us avoid that because we can document during the clinic whilst looking at the patient and actually having a meaningful clinical interaction with them. We also asked people about whether they're satisfied with the quality of the typed notes. So a lot of the time what happens is a senior clinician goes on their ward round where they see all the patients who are admitted and a more junior clinician follows them with a computer and then types up the clinical interaction. So a lot of the time when there's a huge patient burden, the quality of that sort of typed up entry can be substandard to say the least sometimes. And what it might miss out on is the really important clinical information that might be crucial to patient care. So not looking at the electrocardiogram, not looking at a crucial critical blood result or not documenting it, not mentioning a chest x-ray report, for example, or a scan report. And we recently started piloting Heidi in that use case, so looking at the inpatient space for patients who are actually admitted for the ward round and seeing whether we can meet a set of criteria that we normally looked at. So it's things like documenting vital signs, blood results, imaging findings. So we've got a specific checklist that's called a ward round checklist that you have to complete, and comparing it to whether or not manually entered notes complete that checklist. And what we're seeing so far is obviously a huge discrepancy in that Heidi actually achieves most of those things or helps us achieve most of those target criteria that we look at to provide safer, better quality care versus typed notes that are often missing that information. And that's pretty much where we are at the moment.
Amazing, thank you. I wonder if we should open up to questions, or is there anything else that you think we should cover, Hannah, right now?
No, I don't think so. I think it would be good. Yeah, we've been talking for a while, but yeah, I think it'd be good to kind of take any questions that anyone has.
And if not as well, Heidi team will be, if you want a demo or if you want to check out the product, obviously we can do that as well after this. But yeah, any questions, anything that's burning on your mind? Yes?
I'll start with one on customer consent or client consent. Do you have to ask somebody, say, are you willing to be recorded by AI or whatever?
Yeah.
What is the situation?
Great
with regards to
question.
that?
Yeah, really interesting question. And I'd love to get everyone else's thoughts on how they do this. I can speak for how I do it, for sure. So I think, and when we kind of think about, you know, the GMC guidance on good medical practice, you know, it's important to kind of bear that in mind when you think about, obviously, patient consent. and there are various different sort of methods that our PCNs, ICBs and individual GPs use. I usually verbally will consent a patient when they come into the room. You know, I'll explain I'm using a tool that will help me write my notes. It's going to listen to our conversation, generate my note for me. Is that okay? Obviously, you have to then be prepared that if they do want to learn a bit more, you know, you're then going to be delving into it a bit more. I've never had a patient say no. And in fact, one patient who worked in tech wanted to see the result, which was really interesting, and wanted to kind of study the note, which was great. But we have, you know, posters, we have kind of SMS that you can send out to all of your patients. We have, you know, a rotating thing on your TV you can have in the kind of patient waiting room. So it's a really important conversation that we have with all of our GPs, and we really kind of adapt to what you need kind of on the ground. Anyone else to add to that?
You go first.
So in terms of regulation versus guidance, so consent is required. Let's just start from the beginning. When a patient enters your room, okay, when they're there to see you as a clinician, where you're going to provide care, it's implied consent that what you do in that room for that care is enough. Okay, so that's implied consent. So and there's no hard and fast rule, and there's no it's not clear. It's actually quite grey. So the theory is that if Heidi or any sort of ambient AI tool is just there to provide a set of notes that you would have done anyway, it's just in a different way, so it's just part of the consultation, then implied consent, technically implied consent is applicable. The issue comes when you look at things like ethics, right? So GMC talks a lot about ethics and what is ethical and what is not ethical. And the GMC say that actually as a clinician, you should be telling your patient, you should be completely open and honest with the patient on what you're using. If you're using something different than what you would normally use, or what if they were to go to another clinician, they wouldn't use, you should be open and honest with that patient and say, I am using this, do you consent? Right? So the path of least resistance is to say, I am using this tool, do you consent? There's nothing to say you have to have written consent. Usually verbal consent is adequate. That's what most GPs are doing. But it is a bit grey. And so I personally just take the path of least resistance and I just get verbal consent. And that's it.
I mean, I don't get consent, so what I have... But anyway, I have tried to cover myself, so because I didn't want to enter this conversation where you're asking the patient wants to know all about it. You know, I just think, you know, the whole point is...
TikTok.
Exactly, the whole point is making it, you know, meant to be making it quicker. So, and also as a PCN, we were going to use this piece of software. So I spoke to our data protection officer at the ICB level, and he basically said, yes, we consent to it and we've looked at it. So we've now essentially got his kind of word in, which is kind of, I suppose, a way to say, yes, this is a credible piece of, you know, software that we support. And we have it put on our website, we have it on our phone lines, so when patient calls, we have it. And when I document within my consultations into EMIS, I have a shortcut where basically I've said using a automated software with no patient identifiable information. And the other thing I do is when I'm speaking to the patient, I don't say their name when I put record. So I'll say, okay, am I speaking to, and then I press record. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I feel quite, you know, confident that I'm covering myself in that way. I've got it all over the place. We've got posters. And I think, you know, like you said, you know, we're not doing anything wrong. I mean, you know, Dragon software has been around for so long, and patients, you know, doctors or people who don't like to type, it's been, and that wasn't really made a big deal of. So why is this really any different?
Chuck.
Yes.
Hi.
Got
Did I get it right?
Yeah. You nailed it.
Great.
Great. So this might be the most boring question of the session, but it's about critical thinking. So there's a difference between kind of like starting and drafting something yourself and editing it. At least I find kind of during my day-to-day workflows. And like I was only a doctor for a hot minute, but like
In that hot minute.
I remember like part of like getting to the like diagnosis and the like outcome was like, you know, structuring my thoughts and writing it down and doing all of that. So that's all a long-winded way to say, like, are you finding that it's harder to do critical thinking if you're editing the output of Heidi rather than writing the original inputs yourself?
But I think to answer that, you're doing the critical thinking whilst you're talking to the patient, right?
Yeah.
So because what AI is doing, or what Scribe is doing, is literally just taking what you've said.
Yeah.
So when I consult with a patient, I do all the consultation in that room, and I make my decision there. If I need to change something, which relatively rare, but if I do, I'll call them up and say, I've changed it for that. But all my critical thinking is done there, and all that the Scribe is doing is picking up that type of critical thinking. I think where you might be kind of alluding to is when you get things like generative AI that suggests things and infers things and produces possible differential diagnoses and suggests how to treat certain things. That's where the fear comes in, and that if you take AI at face value and say, you know, at this time it was right, you look at it and you say, this time it's right, you look at it the next time and say, oh, it's actually right, and so on and so forth. You build a trust into that generative output, and it does fail. We know about hallucinations, we know about those types of things. It will fail at some point, but the worry is that if you put too much trust in it and you just say, take it, you will stop reading your notes and, you know, proofreading all of that. That's where the critical thinking, but we're not there. I don't think anybody in this room would be happy to just let AI be an agentic sort of agent in the background, making those decisions and press and go.
Simon? It's interesting though, because you do have to adapt how you consult, right? So when I'm typing, I've got something to do with my hands. Like, what do I do with my hands now? Like, I sit on them, you know. So you do have to kind of think about that. It does change the way that you consult with the patient. So it is quite interesting. And also, I didn't really realise until I wasn't doing it anymore, but I would have jotted down a note, say in, you know, System 1 or whatever. Remember to ask them about smoking. And now I have to like really engage in reminding myself to think of that, right? Because you know it's going to be there, you know, and I've got to remember to say that. So you do have to kind of adapt your method of consulting. Good question.
Yeah. I mean, to support that though, we have had this debate. So I'm a trainer, to whether we should allow our GP trainees to use it. So ST1s and ST2s, if people know GP trainers, there's 3 years. Because, is there an element that when you document, you are essentially formulating a diagnosis, you are essentially understanding what red flags are, what are not red flags, and what is, you know, crucial. So, you know, as a, you know, West Middlesex is where I work for as a GP trainer, we've decided unfortunately for our ST1s and ST2s, we won't let them use Heidi. But once they get to ST3, they will be liberated. I mean, I do get that. I think there is an element to that. But I still think, you know, you, in that consultation, are making a working diagnosis. And I think what I find particularly useful is, because I'm not having to listen, you know, so carefully to each and everything they're saying, I can open up their patient letters. I can read when their last colonoscopy was, when their last, you know, I can basically, you know, because basically about the cognitive load, I don't have to listen so carefully, because patients sometimes do talk, and, you know, as we get more experience, we do know what, you know, the complaint is and how we're going to manage it. But actually what we need to know is a bit more about their past medical, a bit more about their blood test results, a bit more of their background, which, you know, of course, they don't always know themselves. So I mean, so I think there is an element of it. So I do think in training, you have to be careful with it.
Last question,
I mean, I was thinking
Simon.
to also what you said, I'm not young. So I probably have learned, I'm a consultant at UCLH, that I've probably learnt how to think critically. And Dara said, I know you're all younger than me, but you've learnt to think critically.
Yeah.
And
We're not that
there was well, maybe a bit. And I think that, that one of the concerns is the unintended consequences. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I can see how helpful it would be for GPs and actually allow you to have that real connection, real engagement, real embodied experience with your doctor, which is actually what people want.
Yeah.
And we don't have replicants yet, as I was saying to Jonathan, like Rachel in Blade Runner, the original film, where she doesn't even know she's a robot. So we're not quite there yet. So AI isn't going to take over in that way. But I think the unintended consequences are of concern, and I think. And I was speaking to a senior lawyer a little while ago who said, junior and middle grade lawyers, we're worried. We're worried because we don't need them, but then who's going to be the senior lawyer? And I can see that that is one of the issues. So your decision, which of course there could be an avalanche where I've got it on my iPhone, or I'm going to use some other AI, I'm going to do it anyway because it's quicker and easier. I think the unintended consequences need to be thought through quite carefully because you're all able to think critically, so you can evaluate it very nicely and go, no, that's confabulation, not hallucination. I'm a psychiatrist. And that bit's not right. And it didn't add that bit in, that's fine. Yeah. But for the juniors coming up, or our medical students coming up, I think there's an issue. How will they learn to think like human beings?
There's a lot of work going around for academics, so in academia, because of all these new tools like Perplexity and deep research, where it literally just compiles everything. And there's a really big worry that if you've got somebody who needs to write an article or an essay, you put it into ChatGPT and you just let it rip, and it will. And that is a big worry.
Yeah. Well known.
But if you're senior, you can then look at it critically and go, that's not quite right. Jane used ChatGPT a few weeks ago for something. I went, that paragraph was written by chat. It's not you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can tell. Yeah.
Maybe it'll get better and better and better if you say, no, now I want you to think like a woman of this age, or a man like this, or a trans or whatever. A person of that type, of that age, from that country, and it's getting better and better. We won't have those skills. It's how we learn to be human growing up and use this.
Yeah, totally. Just to add to that, so Oscar, wave your hand, Oscar, is heading up doing a couple of projects with really interesting universities, looking at how students use, medical students come through and use Heidi. So do have a chat with him afterwards. We've got some interesting projects coming up.
Final question. Yes.
So I actually had a question relating to that to some extent, but not specifically Heidi, but really curious to know your thoughts on this. But I think back in like 2017 or 18 at some point, I went to a conference and the chair of NHS Digital spoke, and he said that I foresee like a situation where in the future every doctor would have to have a second opinion by AI, whether or not they decide to choose, whether or not to accept that or whether or not to override it. That's like on the doctor, but like they would have to like sort of legally get a second opinion. So I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is that something that you would foresee? Is that something that you would like? Do you think there's any advantages?
Yeah, I can take that if you want. So I think there's a lot of excitement around the potential for AI and how it can make our lives better. What I get really excited about is all of the kind of unseen work that I have to do after I've seen my patient list that morning, all of the bloods I have to then order, all of the x-rays I have to do, all of the referrals I have to do, the advice and guidance, all of the extra admin. I feel like that is the area that we are in desperate need of support on, as opposed to what you're describing. So I think there's a whole load of different use cases, but where do I see the kind of potential and where do I see the excitement in? And I feel like that's a really nice kind of ending for the panel, is to get the kind of, future view is in the kind of, before the consultation, how can we make the clinicians' lives easier? And after the consultation, how can we make our lives easier? So that when that patient leaves the room, I'm done, my work is done.
Thank you so much to our panel, and thank you all for coming. Please stay. I think after this, the Heidi team will be around to do some demos if you'd like to check that out, or continue the conversation. But thank you all, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.